Senator, thank you. Senator Gravel, same question. Other than Iraq, three most important enemies to the United States.
We have no important enemies. What we need to do is begin to deal with the rest of the world as equals, and we don't do that. We spend more as a nation on defense than all the rest of the world put together. Who are we afraid of? Who are you afraid of? I mean, it is unbelievable. The military-industrial complex not only controls our government, lock, stock, and barrel, but they control our culture.
Senator Edwards, same question. Other
okay,
than
that's
Iraq,
enough for you.
Three most...
I hate your fucking guts, but I love you all so much. Sometimes you make me overcome with grief, but you're everything I need.
I got higher education for you, vaccinations for you, and all kinds of experimental medications for you. I got professors and doctors, indoctrinated kids, and media outfits to tell you just how great it is. We concentrated it, now you must depend upon banking institutions integrated with the Pentagon. It's been said we spread malice and greed, but the benefits are limitless. We got everything you need. While you were sleeping, we came and took it all away. Yeah, you can bet the farm on that. You never saw us creeping, and that's how it is gonna stay. That's why they say, that's why they say, that's why they say.
Military-industrial complex.
I hate your fucking guts.
That's what they say.
We are live. Welcome to UCY Radio. Welcome to the one and only Sunday night Voice of Rebellion program. This is Chris J, and I have Al Shores with me in the studio. And tonight we have our topic is about Edward Snowden, and it makes me think because now it's been 2 years since he was granted temporary asylum in Russia. He received a 1-year asylum at first. And now I think he's got 3-year asylum is what he's on right now in Russia, where he escaped to from Hong Kong, and he was stuck in the Moscow International Airport. He was bound to go to Havana. However, for some reason, he was not able to take that flight. And it's really been, in some ways, is about where he'll eventually, a permanent place for him still hasn't been decided. There's been speculation. Like the one time, I believe that Evo Morales' plane was stopped because they thought he was going to bring him back to Bolivia. Or no, it was Assange I was thinking of. Which also is another whistleblower, and he's still in the London embassy, even though that his health has been failing.
I think you're thinking of the Bolivian president when his plane got diverted because they thought he had Snowden on board, and the United States lied to Europe to divert the plane because they knew which airport it left from, and that wasn't the airport where Snowden was hiding at that time. Bolivia was considering asylum for Assange.
Right.
For Snowden at that time.
It was Snowden, yeah.
Gave along with a few other Latin American countries. But I was under the impression that the one of today's topic was what real patriotism is, and that Snowden would be among those, as well as Assange. I mean, Assange is an Australian national, but the U.S. government is accusing him of treason, although he's never sworn loyalty to the Constitution. And, of course, most of U.S. politicians really don't adhere to the Constitution or follow their allegiance, so they could all be charged with treason as well. I think that these were acts of patriotism, the act of whistleblowing, whether it was from an American national or an Australian national. And the fact that Latin America is standing up to the empire and offering asylum to these gentlemen is a good thing. And Latin America themselves are continuing in their struggle for independence, especially economic independence from the United States, through democratic socialism, and uniting their countries and using their natural resources to better the conditions of the poor of their country and to build a more classless society.
Yes, and now we have all but 2 countries that belong to the Pink Tide left-wing movement that has started. Was really starting with Venezuela in South America. Now just Colombia and Paraguay are left outside of this, and which that's definitely. It's definitely a sign of unity. Also, considering the fact that when Venezuela faced the sanctions from D.C., all but Venezuela, all the countries. There's not a single country that I think in South America that was against the repealing of the sanctions, and they all stood in solidarity with Venezuela.
CELAC. It was every Caribbean nation as well. And this included the U.S. allies of Mexico, Colombia, and Honduras. Every single South American and Central American nation, including every single Caribbean nation, Haiti, Dominican Republic, etc., condemned Obama for the sanctions against Venezuela. And more people than voted for Maduro in Venezuela signed the petition condemning this, which Maduro brought to Panama in the Summit of the Americas, where he was able to confront Obama. And Raul Castro was there. And you have this contradiction with the Cuban situation. The United States is willing to make conciliatory moves to Cuba, while in the same breath making sanctions against Venezuela, a democratic government. Such is the hypocrisy of the so-called U.S. hypocrisy, which is known as the empire throughout the world.
Yeah, and also is that the fact that Mexico and Colombia even that have been pretty staunchly DC's allies, and with Peña Nieto and Santos being generally with the United States on most issues, and that they stood in solidarity with Venezuela on this one, is a telling sign. And I think that eventually Mexico and Colombia will go to the left and have left-wing leaders in the next few years. I think that Mexico sooner than Colombia, because Mexico is, there's a lot of people that are demonstrating. It's near the brink of a revolution, I think, after the kidnapping of the 42 students in Mexico. I think Colombia in 2018, along with Paraguay, I think are both going to elect leftist leaders, because the way Lugo was thrown out of power, for one, in Paraguay was not democratic, and the people really didn't support it. It was just a Congress and a political coup. In Colombia, people are growing tired of the Uribist and Santoist era of today in Colombia. So I think it's going to be eventually a whole Latin America-wide movement in every country in Latin America. I think one day will be against DC. And really, another thing that's happened today to show what the tide that's turning against, for the people against the international bankers is Greece today,
okay,
where the Greek people
continue.
The Greek people voted no for that referendum. The Greek people voted no for that referendum today. This is showing how the tide's turning, and told the EU creditors that Greek will not pay the not the debt that was levied on them, and it was levied on them in a usury type fashion.
The thing is that
the international bankers work.
The Prime Minister of Greece, the ruler of the Syriza party, he hasn't gone far enough. This is a good move that they did a referendum, and it showed that the majority of the Greeks were against paying off that much of the debt. It's really no surprise the results. It is a historic result. But I think that Alexis is not going far enough. Now he's talking about staying in the EU, continuing negotiations. What he needs to talk about is forming a United Socialist States of Europe. This is an old idea from socialists decades before in Europe, to form the alternative to the capitalist EU. And he could reach out to Spain, to Podemos, in leaving the EU, and to form their own union of European nations. So when they leave the Eurozone, then they would have to worry about the austerity, the debt. I mean, when Lenin took over in Russia, the first thing he did was cancel all the debts that the Russian government had. If Alexis is truly a revolutionary, not a reformist, he needs to take those two other steps. So we'll see what happens in Greece in the next few months. Can I put the number out to the show?
Well, I know the number as well. I'll put it out. 717-8296. That is 718-717-8296.
And on Skype, and CY Radio.
Yeah, and I was thinking that Greece does have an option. I mean, Russia opened their doors for BRICS to allow the Greek government to join BRICS, and the Greek government at any point can join BRICS and leave the EU and become a part of something that's not controlled by the international bankers, and it'd be the much better organization that BRICS is in, that they are, and this will be the sixth country in BRICS. Argentina also showed some interest in joining BRICS, but they didn't get an open invitation to BRICS like Russia gave to Greece. So I think that'd be the smarter option for them.
That was
And
shortly after the
Greece,
visit of Alexis Tsipras to Russia, where he met with Putin. So that was kind of a consequence of that meeting, that offer to Greece. Whether or not they accept it, I don't know, but it'd just be altering one form of capitalism for another. Like I said, they need to form a United Socialist States of Europe.
well, I have to disagree with you on that. That it's a whole different deal, BRICS. I mean, to say that they're just the same as the international bankers, that's corporate
I didn't say
fascism.
that. I said they're a different form of capitalism, maybe a little more humane, but they need to form a society of the working class and form economic unions on the basis of looking out for the working class. That's what real socialism is.
But it's not. It's in Russia's not truly a capitalist country because they have they have state controls over what the corporations can and can't do. I mean, if it was unrestricted capitalism, it's not even. You can't even really consider restricted capitalism because they do give many basic human needs and controlled. They pretty much have the oligarchs under the government control. In fact, they don't have any
The
freedom
policies
of
of
movement.
Russia are very similar to the EU. I lived in the EU. And there is a socialistic domestic policies within the EU. The difference is that Russia is not under the sphere of U.S. influence. So the United States has no influence over Russian foreign policy.
But in the EU, they allow the billionaires in the EU to roam freely and do whatever, and to levy debt on the people.
Iceland is
They don't let
a member
that
of the EU,
happen in
correct?
Russia.
Iceland is a member of the EU, correct?
Yeah, Iceland is.
Yeah, and Iceland threw their bankers in jail and refused to do bailouts. And they're one of the top economies in Europe, alongside Germany and several Scandinavian nations. But the point is, just because you're an EU nation doesn't mean necessarily you have to be for the rich. So there's a little more independence of the people deciding within their EU nation what to do. But then when it comes to foreign policy, being part of NATO, U.S. Sphere of influence, they don't have as much independence, and Russia does. But Russia's internal policies are very similar to the EU in that they mix capitalism with socialism. The ideal society is a society that's purely socialistic and uniting the working class, and that's what Europe eventually needs to do. I'm not saying you can't do it from one day to another, but Greece eventually needs to reach out to the Spaniards and the other European nations, more so than Russia, other European nations, and uniting a socialist union.
Well, Russia is more. It's a lot more socialism than it's capitalism. It's really its own thing. It's pragmatic. It's what is pragmatic at the time.
If you look at
how Russia operates,
countries,
and they stand against the international bankers. So if Greece needs to open their arms to the biggest force against the international bankers because they are the biggest threat to humanity.
Well,
capitalism is bad, but it's not good to go back to that same cycle. However, Russia doesn't allow the same bankers to take charge and cause the same havoc that they can cause in the West. And Russia is not part of the New World Order, and Greece needs to go look towards Russia. But they can also look to Spain. But you have to realize that Russia is going to help them out in any, start out any real resistance inside of Europe.
Eastern Europe, the former Soviet Union countries, Romania, Bulgaria, they became part of the EU when I lived in Spain, right? And many of them migrated to Spain. I made friends with many of them. And Bulgaria and Romania had a law when they became an EU nation saying that all people outside their country could not work outside their country legally. So a lot of people lost their residencies in Spain and Italy and other countries where they worked. They're Romanians, a lot of them poor people, gypsies, and they were forced to return to their country. And the reason why they did that is because they thought, okay, the borders are open now because we're an EU nation. That means so many people are going to flee. Let's try to keep these people here, and let's try to get the people that are abroad back into our country. So they made measures to do that, and it had backfired. But what you see in Eastern Europe today is their economic conditions are far worse than it was under Stalinism. Whether or not you disagree with Stalinism, they had some basis for a socialist economy, and certainly the conditions in Eastern Europe have worsened. And while in Russia there is a stable economy. But go ahead, Chris.
Well, I'm saying that Greece doesn't need to look towards Russia. If they definitely cannot take a stance against Russia, and they definitely have to work with them if there's going to be any resistance inside of Europe, because that's right now it's not like the other countries. There's many countries like them. It's only them really. In West Europe. I mean, there's a few in East Europe that like Slovakia. They're going towards more pro-Russian, or Hungary, or Serbia, but they don't have any. Spain might be soon, but the United Socialist States is kind of far away, and they need to look towards Russia at the moment. I think joining BRICS at the moment would be the right thing, and made later down the road.
I gotta leave. Keep talking. I'll be right back. Okay.
But later down the road.
Did you hear what I said though?
Let's
Chris.
something else work.
Chris,
Yeah, I heard you. I was leaving.
Okay, I'll be right back.
He'll be back soon. But BRICS I think, is what Greece needs to join right now, and it's the very famous intellectual. What's his name? Lyndon LaRouche. Even though I don't support what everything he says stands for, do stand for what he says on Greece needing to join the Russian circle and join BRICS. If they're going to take a real stance against the real enemy, the international bankers and the people that are behind the New World Order, the people that go to the Bilderberg meetings, the people that attend, was thinking what's coming up soon. And I don't want to get into too creepy side of politics right now, but if you want to creep yourself out, go on the internet, look up Bohemian Grove. It happens in July, I think, every year. It's this creepy meeting outside of San Francisco where the elites all go and they do mock sacrifices and all kinds of. Apparently, that's what they say, and then they burn this giant wooden owl. It's a creepy, symbolic thing that they do. You can see the symbolism is definitely towards a darker, side that they do there. But that, all that. And they do the symbol. They do all their symbolic stuff, and the video footage from there is pretty creepy. It's like this wasn't the time of a show. Maybe we'll do a show later about it. But definitely go look it up on Google if you don't know about it yet. It's pretty creepy, and it really shows the attitude of the elites in the United States, in the West. Alex Jones supposedly snuck in there. I think they're more like invited in there. That's what my personal opinion on knowing what Alex Jones has done to the truther community and has confused them, turned them off of socialism, communism, and make it seem like that's the enemy while totally ignoring the corporate fascist element in the room. You wouldn't even talk about Snowden. How the socialist countries are the ones that are accepting Snowden. Yeah, I can hear you. All right. I was back on the show, everybody. But I was thinking get back to the topic that we were talking about with Snowden, or Snowden. It's kind of funny because some people like Alex Jones out there will say how great Snowden is, but they won't talk about the people that were very allied with Snowden and the socialist countries that supported Snowden and gave him asylum. Right. That was what was it? What were the countries they gave him? Nicaragua was one of them, and Venezuela. Maduro.
Bolivia.
That was actually Maduro just came to power. Bolivia had gave it a lot later, but originally there was two countries that almost immediately gave it to him: Nicaragua and Bolivia, or not Bolivia, Venezuela, and then Bolivia was last. They gave it more later that they said they would give him asylum, but he stayed in Russia. Russia still hasn't given him permanent asylum. I don't think he's been there. It's a 3-year asylum they gave him. They gave him from 2013 to 14. Get an asylum, then this one would expire in 2017.
He's got it renewed, yeah.
I think he's going to get a permanent one eventually. I think the reason why if you're coming from the Russian intelligence perspective of things, it's probably it probably was a bit suspicious at first. It's probably they only gave him a 1-year asylum at first they probably wanted to keep an eye on him because it's like. This guy, it seemed like a little bit far-fetched at the beginning maybe to some people that this guy that was working in NSA one day out of his good heart, decided to expose the NSA secrets. It might have been a ploy, or they just wanted the secret to be out there. And I think honestly, the government actually likes to keep people in a state of fear, and they like to keep them. At this point, they're letting the people know that they're authoritarian, that they're fascist, and they're saying who will stay asleep, who will actually do something about it. Or mostly, they're going to
You've had whistleblowers that have revealed more than Snowden that barely got any coverage. Then, because very intentional, the government now is permitting it to be talked about on the corporate media, because they're using it to their advantage to try to intimidate the masses. And to counter the intimidation, you need activism. And that's what I wanted to talk about briefly is my recent trip to Philly that I wrote an article about that hopefully will be published soon in the People's Tribune, also for our Latin comrades and for the in El Tribuno del Pueblo. So if you permit me, I'd like to read the article I wrote about the recent Philly trip.
Yes, you can read the article, Al.
Okay, let's see here. Meeting with celebrity activists, rappers like Immortal Technique and Rebel Diaz may have been what you would expect to be the highlights of such a trip I took from Florida to Philadelphia to be at the summer's U.S. Social Forum. Oh, I'm sorry, let me give the title real quick. The Revival in Philly, my experience at the historic U.S. Social Forum. So I go on from there to say, may have been what you expect to be the highlights of such a trip I took from Florida to Philadelphia to be at the summer's U.S. Social Forum. However, my encounters with them were brief. They were not in the march, and when you meet them, you see they're activists just like you. The encounters with them were great, but I met many extraordinary people from all over the world fighting in the same struggle for the same cause as me. I met comrades from Honduras, Peru, Montreal, Quebec, Paris, France, Ghana, Africa, from Kentucky, from Boston, from Florida, from all over, who all came to the U.S. Social Forum to continue their activism to bring radical revolutionary change. And I saw the revival of activism like in Occupy Days come out in the great city of Philadelphia, in whose name is Greek in origin, the city of brotherly love, where the Declaration of Independence was written, the hometown of Benjamin Franklin, Mumia Abu-Jamal, and Noam Chomsky. Besides those prominent names, the name of Sherry Hunkelas should be a household name for all activists. She lives in Philly and helped revive the Poor People's Economic Human Rights Campaign, PPERC, which was started by Dr. King. She also happened to have run for vice president of the U.S. with the Green Party in 2012. Sherry led the march we had on Saturday, along with homeless and poor people, especially people of color. Some were part of the Black Lives Matter movement. Others were local people Sherry was helping. People from the ghetto, from Kensington, in the area near North Philly, where Temple University is, who hosted us, were present. Sherry told us the case of the 14-year-old boy dying of cancer who the emergency assistance people in downtown Philly still refused to house, as they and others have not housed a single family in 5 years, as they continue to hoard tax dollars and corruption continues. That is why from North Philly we marched to their office in downtown to protest the fact families are dying on the street or being sent to the church Sherry helps run in Kensington, instead of providing the service they are paid to do. Immediately after emergency services, we went to our final spot, which was where a statue of the racist mayor of Philly from the 1970s, Mayor Riso, was placed. But we'll get into that later. We marched, about 500 of us, which would have been more if not for the rain, which poured at times, for a good half an hour to emergency services where speeches were given. Prior to that, Reverend Bruce Wright went to the university where the forum was going on, and on loudspeaker called the comrades to come to the streets and join the march. Surprisingly, a large amount of the participants came out with us, including members of Code Pink. It was like God was testing our resolve, not just from the rain throughout, but as literally when we arrived at emergency services, the rain increased. It was all outpouring. In the front part of the protest, there was children and people on wheelchairs throughout it, both speaking into the loudspeaker alongside Sherry for us to move on. What we were fighting for and started various chants, my favorite being what was written on my sign, which I tucked away inside my jacket most of the time as I held the PPERC sign in the front. The people united will never be defeated, or as they say in Spanish, el pueblo unido jamás será vencido. The police blocked off the roads, but we had our comrades and cars ahead of us, and the police, who knew we never asked permission to march, parted ways and let us pass through. I felt proud we were represented as Reverend Bruce Wright, who came up from Florida with us, spoke about how Florida was one of the worst states in treating the poor, and how a 93-year-old man was arrested for feeding the poor in Philadelphia and Fort Lauderdale. Bruce had walked into a workshop prior to that and asked all the comrades present who was for reform. Not a single hand was raised. He then asked who was for revolution, where he got a standing ovation of people full of revolutionary enthusiasm, which showed clearly the general sentiments of the people at this particular forum, far more radical than the left forums I had been at prior in New York. I thought to myself, as we marched, how glad I was I decided not to fly back, but to stay an extra day to be in the march and return to Florida with my comrades in a van. Among those to speak when we finally reached emergency services was an activist from Miami I had not met till then, Pedro Poeta, or Pedro the Poet, who was a rapper activist. Florida was clearly represented in that march. We then converged on the Rizzo statue and exposed this old mayor for his racist practices in Philly. This was the man who helped set up the Black Panther affiliate and activist, Mumia, who is still in jail to this day. The city could have money to erect such statues, but not to help the poor dying in the streets. As we marched towards Rizzo, we saw a huge abandoned church, which comes out in the YouTube video of the forum, which was already released. After a long march, I finally made it back to the church in West Kensington, where we had been sleeping, to see performances were being set up. Pedro Poeta was to perform again with his incredible revolutionary energy, as he was on the front lines of the march, barely rested, and had done a concert alongside Dave, his backup singer, the night before. Pedro is originally from Nicaragua and had migrated to Florida some years prior. He also happens to be a teacher teaching troubled high school students. On the way back in the van, I called into a radio program I co-host and passed the phone over to Pedro so he could be interviewed. Crown Dion is a rap activist as well out of St. Pete who performed and did the road trip. I met him prior. Also, the next day, this morning, I was on Don's program he co-hosts out of Sarasota, Florida. Don, 79 years old, was also in the march. There was people of all ages and colors present. Don had in fact been to Peru, where my father is from, and met Gustavo Gutierrez, the founder of Liberation Theology. Don also knew Dr. King. Right after Don interviewed me, he had Bruce Wright himself call in, and we are working here to continue our work and spread the word inspired by the forum in Philly. While I marched, it was my first major march since Occupy a couple years prior. I thought of all those who died too young and left behind their legacy for us to fight for. I thought of Anne Frank, of my comrade Marty Droll, who I had marched with in Tampa and showed me around Philly in my first trip there, and of my sister Tasha Suarez. I thought how this would inspire my third book and my continued activist work, how this vanguard of people, the downtrodden of society, could come together and make the impossible possible. The theme for the forum was Another World is Possible, which is a common chant in Occupy. I think not only is another world possible or probable, but inevitable. We can be the change for the very survival of human species, so that all the sacrifices before us are not in vain and our children and grandchildren can live in a better society, as they deserve better. I fight for the future of my niece and all the unborn children as we dream for a new society and make this dream reality. Hope to see you at the World Forum in Montreal next year. So, since I wrote that, I finally completed my third book, which will be up for publication soon, The Vanguard Faction. So it's about that vanguard, that revolutionary vanguard led by the youth of the revolutionary movement that I think that, as I saw in the revival in Philly, that we can make into a reality. And I'm sure there's plenty of comrades internationally that will support us in that endeavor as well.
Okay, well, so when's the World Forum is when exactly?
It's going to be in July next year, and it's going to be in Montreal. And before that, we're going to protest the DNC in Philly, and then we're going to protest the RNC in Cleveland, and then we're going to go, those who can afford passports. Luckily, I have a passport that I renewed, and go over into Montreal and see our comrades over there. We're probably going to go through Boston, Vermont, to get up to Montreal.
Honestly, I thought Canada you didn't necessarily have to have a passport. I thought there was some kind of.
That's been that way since the early 2000s. Now you need either a special ID or a passport. When I was there in the late 90s, you didn't need that, but unfortunately you do now. So the comrades that don't have the special ID or the passport won't be able to make it to Montreal. But I'm sure a lot of them will go to the DNC and the RNC, and we might have an encampment set up at those cities that will be going on during the convention, as it was in 2012 when we had the RNC here in Tampa.
Yes, I remember when the RNC happened. There was a protest. There was Anonymous was there. Many left-wing activists were there. I remember just the extreme steps that they went there. They went through. They put up cameras all throughout the city. Every corner was coated in cameras. They had riot police out there. It was just absolutely ridiculous that to protect these corporate fascist representatives in the RNC, and that would have been the same at the DNC. Also, just a little thing to remember at the DNC of 2012, but for all the people that question whether Obama is actually pro-Israel or not, well, that's where Obama said that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel and always will be, and pretty much bowed down to Israel heavily.
The undivided capital. He said that at AIPAC before he was elected president.
Yes, he said that there, and he reassured it in 2012.
Right.
Which pretty much, when you say that, you pretty much mean that you don't want Palestine around, or that you want it, put into just into a few spots out on the West Bank in Gaza because it's the people that actually believe in a two-state solution will at least say that it should be East Jerusalem should at least be Palestinian, and I believe all Jerusalem should belong to one country, but it's not Israel. It should be Palestinian because you have to remember that Israel usurped that land back in 1947, and I'm tired of the people that also say that that it's like Palestine never existed. Well, Palestine did exist, and it existed for hundreds of years, even though it was at times was controlled by the Ottoman.
One time, this guy told me that it was Jordan. It was all Jordan. I said, "Excuse me, Jordan was invented, not Palestine. Jordan was invented by the British because the Hashemites were kicked out of Arabia and replaced with the Saudis. Even though the Hashemites helped Lawrence of Arabia exile the Turkish rulers, the Ottoman rulers from the Middle East. So the Hashemites were imported into the Jordan Valley, and they made the Transjordan Kingdom, later called Jordan. So if anything was invented, it was Jordan. It wasn't that Palestine didn't exist and it's really Jordan. How could you explain then that the Palestinian Talmud that the Jews had for thousands of years? How could you explain the fact that Jews have been called Palestinian themselves for thousands of years? I mean, you have Jewish Arabs. These terms. The people don't understand them anymore because of how things have been changed because of the imposition of Zionism. But if you look at the actual history, a lot of the Zionist myths can easily be debunked.
Yes, and also it is true that there was the British mandate, but the thing was that it's not like Palestine was created by the British. No, Palestine was occupied by the British after World War I. Romans 2,000 years ago first made Palestina, and Jesus called himself Palestinian in those times under Roman rule. But during the British time, it was just and let me give a little bit of a history lesson just to remind you what became the IDF, what became Israel. Well, there was a few, and they called themselves openly terrorist groups that were Zionists and wanted for an Israeli Jewish state, and to be, and these people, Zionists, often were Jewish only by blood, and they just believed that their blood was superior, not by religion. Right. And one of the groups is openly supportive of Adolf Hitler, and they believed that Adolf Hitler could counter the British presence in the region, and so that was actually, they were openly fascist. Another group split off the Zionist Federation of Germany that had signed a deal with Nazi Germany to conquer Palestine back in 1933, and they were a direct descendant of a pro-Nazi group. The other group was the group that they were they were also aligned with one of the other groups, I think. And then, of course, the Irgun was the group that did the King David Hotel bombing. The mastermind of that
was the first Israeli Prime Minister, I believe, Ben Gurion. He was the mastermind of the King David Hotel bombing, and that's how the terrorism was introduced to Jerusalem. Was the bombing and the targeting of British by Jews disguised as Arabs?
Yeah, and the thing was that they were caught later, a little bit after the actual King David Hotel bombing happened, but they wouldn't even apologize to the British because they believed the British were inferior. And they believed that they were superior and morally correct.
If you put
so they only apologized for the Jews that had died in the building.
Zionist atheists out there. So if you put a Zionist atheist in front of me, I'm going to say, okay, the notion of Zionism is that God gave you this land, right? So God is a real estate agent, but you're saying God doesn't exist now? And then probably their answer will be, well, Jewish blood superior, this and that. I'm like, doesn't that kind of sound like, the Nazis, like how their supremacy, like chosen people, but you could take parts of the Torah, just like you could take parts of the Bible and the Quran to justify anything. They use...
Well, here's the thing about that, is that they actually don't even use the Torah to justify their Zionist claim. They use the Talmud. The Torah would debunk the claim. The Torah said that they cannot have it.
Written in the name of Jesus Christ. So it has some influence from the Torah in the Talmud, but yes, they are separate entities.
And the Torah says that they're not allowed to have a Jewish state until after the Messiah comes. So what? They believe that a guy that didn't even believe in God, Thomas Herzl, did they believe that he was the Messiah? No.
Whether Herzl was an atheist, he said in his diaries that he didn't want his son circumcised. Okay, so what kind of Jew doesn't want their sons circumcised? So there are rabbis that came later on after Herzl to try to say that they were kind of a messianic thing to justify the Jews returning to Palestine, or what they called Israel. But if you actually look at the guy who started Herzl, he was by no means religious. I don't know if he was an atheist. Certainly there was atheist Zionists around him, but he was by no means religious. And the Zionist project looked at Africa initially to make a colonial settlement of Jews there. Later, for biblical purposes, they used Palestine, and they made the deal with the Rothschilds in England.
Well, yes. In fact, the Rothschilds helped build the Knesset, and the Rothschilds pretty much were very involved in the creation of Israel, and they're still in control of Israel. So really, it's like often people say that Israel is almost like the puppet master of the United States, but really, in a way, they're just another puppet being held up by the puppet masters that are the Rothschilds. And then there's the United States at the end of that puppet, which Israel does have an extreme amount of influence because, of course, of the AIPAC lobby. That they are the biggest lobby, even bigger than a lot of people like this. Mostly gun control activists. I hate to call them activists because they are activating the demobilization of the working class. But these, gun control supporters, they always say the NRA is the biggest lobby, but the truth is AIPAC's the biggest lobby and the most richest lobby. And you see how presidents act, or any politician acts when they visit AIPAC and have to speak. They're bowing down, it seems like. They're always talking about how they'll do Israel's agenda. We'll have to bomb Iran, including Hillary Clinton, who's said that many times, including at AIPAC one time, which makes me think of Hillary Clinton.
I wanted to play a video. We were talking about the hypocrisy of democracy. It's at 1 minute and 40 seconds of Malcolm X talking about that.
Okay. Are you ready to play now?
Yeah, I'm just putting the volume up. Hold on.
But don't scare Negroes today with no badge or no white skin or no white sheet or no white anything else. The police the same way. They put their club upside your head and then turn around and accuse you of attacking them. Every case of police brutality against a Negro follows the same pattern. They attack you, bust you all upside your mouth, and then take you to court and charge you with assault. What kind of democracy is that? What kind of freedom is that? What kind of social or political system is it when a black man has no voice in court, has nothing on his side other than what the white man chooses to give him? My brothers and sisters, we have to put a stop to this. And it will never be stopped until we stop it ourselves. They attack the victim. And then the criminal who attacked the victim accuses the victim of attacking him. This is American justice. This is American democracy. And those of you who are familiar with it know that in America, democracy is hypocrisy. Now, if I'm wrong, put me in jail. But if you can't prove that a democracy is not hypocrisy, then don't put your hands on me.
Woo! Did you hear that all right?
Yeah, that's actually pretty good volume. Yeah, it's and that's American democracy. Hypocrisy happens all the time. But I think that at this point, it doesn't even seem like America is starting. Like I said, what's happened in the last 5 years or so is that it seems like America's not even trying to disguise what they do with the democracy anymore. They're trying to say pretty much it's almost becoming an open oligarchy, becoming an open corporate fascist country, and the people are accepting it. And the sad thing is that people feel intimidated. They feel like they can't do anything, so they just lay down and roll over. Well, the truth is that they could do something with activism, and really it wouldn't even take most of us. It would take 10% of us. We could have a revolution if 10% of us got up and started marching down the streets of Washington, D.C. and demanded that all those representatives, the president, all these puppets,
we need
left D.C. immediately.
Democracy. But let me ask you this: what is real patriotism? Right? I mean, we've discussed that in the description of our show and prior. You have this interpretation of patriotism that's imposed upon us by the corporate media. which is merged with the U.S. government. That it's blind loyalty to the flag, to symbols that represent the U.S. government. But I think we need to be loyal with our eyes open to the American people, to the people of our own nation and the people throughout the world. When you're loyal to humanity, that's the real form of patriotism. And Snowden, out of loyalty to his principles, revealed what he revealed. And I think it was right of the American people in the world to know what Snowden had revealed. And he did it knowingly that he would have to suffer the consequences and probably go into exile and give up his luxurious life that he had in Hawaii, working for a corporation that merged with the government that was an affiliate of the NSA. So I think that people like Snowden, people like Assange, who's stuck in the Ecuadorian embassy in London, that these are heroes and in their own way real patriots, in spite of what the Orwellian media says.
Yes. And it's not only are they are the truest form of patriots, because standing up against this corrupt government that's imposing tyranny, imposing corporate fascism on the people. That those people are traitors. Those people also are the same ones. I'll put a statistic out there: 15% of all senators in Congress or in the Senate have a dual Israeli citizenship, including Bernie Sanders. Just to put that out there.
I heard that recently Bernie Sanders denied it in an interview, but regardless, he's been to Israel a couple of times. He's certainly hypocritical on the Israeli question.
And I don't even think it's really much of a question. I think the fact is that he's going to course it. I mean, he's going to make it seem like it's complete nonsense. However, it's pretty clear that he's had an Israeli passport that he's kept in secret, Israeli citizenship that he's kept in secret, and he lived in Israel, I believe, at one point of his life. So it's pretty clear that he has an Israeli citizenship that he wants to keep hidden, because he knows that he would turn off a lot of his potential supporters that are pro-Palestinian, or at least believe in a two-state solution. And many believe in a one-state solution. And at one point when I was younger, I thought Bernie Sanders was the man, but now I realize that this guy is a pro-Zionist, and he's many times his record stated that he supported these acts of genocide or war that the United States has done. But that's off topic. But that's a traitor right there. Somebody he's a super traitor, because he acts like that he could help the American people. That he's on the American people's side, and he's against the corporations. But he works for the corporations. He works for the people, the defensive subcontractors, because he votes for most of the wars. Only ones he didn't vote for were Iraq and Afghanistan, but he voted for Kosovo. He voted for, or actually that was, at that time, it was just the Bosnia and Serbia war. But a patriot like Snowden is totally different. A patriot, they serve the American people. They do not serve, the interest of a foreign country and their people over the American people. But they also are at the same time loyal to humanity, like you said. And people like Snowden, that they don't fear what the government. It could have been a lot worse than what happened. He got exiled to Russia. I mean, I would almost take him being exiled to Russia, but he could have had a lot worse. They could have shot him dead. And they could have really done something bad, or put him in jail.
They could have poisoned him as well. And I was just reading some quotes about patriotism from our founders, and I found a really good one from Samuel Adams. And he was, of course, president at the Boston Tea Party that started the whole thing by boycotting British tea. And it says here, "If ever time should come when vain and aspiring men shall possess the highest seats in government, our country will stand in need of its experienced patriots to prevent its ruin." So a lot of the founders saw patriots as the very people who would prevent tyranny in government, not people who would blindly follow tyranny in government. As a matter of fact, in the Constitution, and this is part of the reason why I study media, the only profession mentioned is media, is journalism, and they're supposed to keep the government in check and be protected. But now you have journalists that have been threatened for prosecution, like what's his name? He wrote for The Guardian. He revealed Snowden's leaks. You know who I'm talking about? He lives in Brazil. He was threatened, and even though he's a journalist and was protected.
Wait. I thought I had the name on, but I forgot it. but yeah, the journalists, and the thing is that these people are not journalists that are that are MSNBC or CNN or Fox. These are these are getting propaganda, literally sent sometimes by foreign governments, our own government, like CNN. They defend Bahrain's government because they have a deal with Bahrain. Or, Fox News, of course, it has defense subcontractors, and they're owned by, good old American Fox News is owned by a Saudi prince and an Aussie, an Aussie media mogul.
Chris, I was talking about Glenn Greenwald. Glenn Greenwald's husband, who also worked for The Guardian, was interrogated in the airport in London. So there was all type of intimidation tactics after Snowden's revelations came out from the publication from Greenwald. So that's showing that today journalism, in many regards, is not protected. That tyranny is on the rise, and I think it's the job of dissenters or patriots to expose that. They want to maintain a police state, but in secret. Those that expose it will help prevent its spreading. I think that's at least one way to combat it.
Well, yeah, the police state in many ways has been kept in secret. Like, many aspects to the police state that people do not see or they keep hidden. And one literally is that literally most of the United States is becoming under surveillance in one way or another, either via drones by police departments or, if you live in Florida and you see these smart LED streetlights, for example, and many other places in the United States as well, but Florida's been putting them in. They hear that they have these streetlights are smart, and they also have they can view what's down the ground below them. So they're cameras as well, and they can relay information back to a General Electric's main base where they have where they get the footage, and then they give that footage to the government by request of the government. This is one way, and people, of course, would be very alarmed by that a lot of the country's under surveillance, or the fact that our police are becoming practically like mini armies. In fact, the New York Police Department has 800,000 members, and if the New York Police Department used every member of its force, it would become the 19th biggest standing army on the planet, just the city's police department.
City, the people that former Mayor Bloomberg called his private army, that were among the most ruthless police forces in the United States. Probably in Oakland, second only to Oakland, who openly attack veterans who are activists as well. But I've myself witnessed the brutality of the NYPD. The same men who strangled Eric Gardner to death and got away with it on camera.
Yes, and also New York PD is the same ones that the same ones that dealt with the Cecily McMillan, the famous activist that we interviewed. That was in New York.
Charged with assault for being beaten up by cops because she's an activist. Such as countless black women throughout the decades have been charged with assault for getting beaten up by police officers, as Malcolm was mentioning in the video earlier.
Yeah, they'll go beat you upside the head with a club, and then you get charged with assault, or you get charged with whatever, resisting arrest. That's also another one that is ridiculous, because they have a fine line what they consider resisting arrest. I mean, for some people, if it's somebody that's not politically involved, they might let them, even start walking away, or even start running a little bit, or may not running, but and they won't give them resisting arrest. An activist, if he even puts his arm up while he's being put in handcuffs, he'll get resisting arrest. I mean, activists, it's really both, even non-activists. The police department just became absolutely brutal, and no long, they should say in fascist America, law breaks you. That should be the new motto of the United States. Well, because that's what's happening. The law is breaking the people, breaking the activists.
And I want to mention that I hope in the next program we can put a Moral Technique song on, because I think in our prior program I mentioned I got to meet him personally in Philly, and I got the okay for him on that. Do you want to play a song for the middle part of the show? Because I got to go get something to drink.
Well, I don't have a way how to play a song on here. I don't have, so okay. It's only the ones at the bumpers. I mean,
Getting some noise.
I'll just keep.
I'm working the studio tonight, so I'm gonna have to move my laptop down the street to get something to drink. But continue speaking. Go right ahead.
Well, you couldn't just leave your laptop in your room and just go
Not
to
in my room. I'm just moved. I have no internet in the house. If I leave it here, it'll be stolen.
Oh yeah, yeah. You just can't leave it idle. I forgot you didn't have internet, but yeah. I'll just keep talking. I wish we had something to play. But what's going to talk about is the fact, Snowden we talk about his NSA leaks all the time. We talk about what he revealed about how they're taking all the metadata, how they're taking how they're watching most of the communications on the internet, if not all. How they're watching most of really, I would say all of electronic communications. Practically, they're watching. I mean, it's not just what's on the internet, text messages, phone calls. They've been watching phone calls since Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan's administration started tapping all phone calls made in the United States, and he's supposedly this champion of liberty, which I really think is a joke because he's also stood heavily against guns. If you look at what he said, Ronald Reagan was definitely champion of liberty, and was his NSA really starting the NSA absurd overreach where every phone call Sorry, we're back. Just me, and I don't know what exactly happened, but it disconnected, and I'm back. This is Chris J. Only Chris J in the studio right now. I'm gonna probably have to disconnect again in a little bit, and then so Al Schwartz can get back into the studio. We're talking about Snowden, true patriots, and anti-imperialist movement that's going on in South America tonight. That is this is tonight's show, and today is July 5th, 2015. And it's about, we're nearing the 10 o'clock hour, top of the 10 o'clock hour here in the East Coast. It'll be 7 over Pacific time, as we're near 10. On the shift, also, not just Snowden didn't just reveal about the NSA spying on us, but also other world leaders. They were spying during the Iranian nuke talks, which still haven't really been completed. And in fact, it seemed like it was just a deal to screw Iran over because they put provisions in there that were impossible for Iran to meet, including the complete disbanding of their arsenal within 6 months' time, which would be a very rushed. Which would be very rushed, and also the fact is, they also put in, or actually, the United States wasn't holding up their end of the deal. Also, forget exactly what part of the deal they weren't holding up, but yeah. So now they're trying to like rearrange it, but I don't think that it's going to happen. In fact, the United States has been coming down on Iran pretty harshly lately, and I wouldn't even blame Iran if they are secretly making nuclear weapons, because Israel has enough nuclear weapons to blow up the entire planet. And they made theirs illegally back in the 1960s. JFK tried to stop it. And they warned very heavily about what nuclear Israel would do, and it's been chaos in the Middle East ever since. Israel has gotten nuclear weapons. Israel's been aiding terrorist groups in Syria, has been aiding terrorist groups in the Middle East, and has been aiding terrorist groups throughout the 80s and 90s, probably, as well as the United States government. Like they aided the Mujahideen against the Soviets during the 1980s, and then then later they supported Al Qaeda in secret, and they supported in Syria Al-Nusra. They support ISIS. Israel supports ISIS, Bahrain supports ISIS, the Gulf states support ISIS, Saudi Arabia supports ISIS. The true enemies to ISIS are actually Iran, Syria, and now Houthi Yemen, which the Houthis are technically... Hello?
Yeah, we somehow got disconnected. The last thing I was saying is that he made attempts to de-Stalinize by like taking Stalin's mausoleum out of the where Lenin was buried and stuff like that, and revealing some of his crimes. But it was hard to rub off Stalinism in him in general.
But was that right? Khrushchev took power in 1954, I believe, right?
Yeah. It was before 56. I'm not negating that.
Yeah. So I think I know my Soviet history pretty well. And then after Khrushchev, of course, some of the stuff was a little bit reverted after when the next guy took power.
More Stalinist than Khrushchev. He immediately returned the Russian troops to Eastern Europe and escalated the Cold War. Only he made in the United States an offer to not support any revolutions in Latin America, which the United States accepted, and that was part of the reason why Fidel had his hands tied and couldn't support Che in Bolivia. The Russians themselves had sabotaged Che in Bolivia. They had ordered the Communist Party in Bolivia not to support the guerrilla struggle. So that was really a treason on the part of Brezhnev.
Yeah, because it was that even not even the Communist Party in Bolivia and they weren't even a state party like that was in charge of Bolivia. They were in the opposition of Bolivia, and they weren't even allowed to support, be in the opposition. They weren't even allowed to support Che. And, Che Guevara might have had a different fate if you actually had, gotten some reinforcements somewhere into Bolivia instead of being captured. But then again, I guess his martyr status did somewhat give Che the image that we have of him today. I mean, the way Che went down, it was kind of an inspiration. Fight to your last breath. And when he looked at the guy that was going to shoot him and said, "Shoot me, you coward! I'm just a man." And, saying that my ideology is much more than just me. Goes, so. And I think the whole revolutionary cause
words were accurate, because a lot of people say that's not what he actually said. It was accurate if you actually look at quotes of what Che had said before that, when he said that he's willing to die for any Latin American nation, and that he said that you can kill the man, but you can't kill the idea. I mean, he fulfilled that, and his last words were reflective of that.
Yeah, but you couldn't kill the revolutionary socialist cause that Che stood for. It's and that's what he was saying when he was about to get shot. And I'm going to put the number once again for the show, since we have 30 minutes left, and it would be maybe we could start a conversation in the last 30 minutes. 718-717-8296. 718-717-8296. So we talk about true patriots that we've had throughout history. Let's talk about one true patriot that really stood for the American people, the American working class, and the working class altogether, and one that was 100 years ago. Ran in 1912 election, and we haven't really gotten to talk about him too much on this program. But what about Eugene Debs? I mean, he counts as a true patriot, and he went to jail for his cause.
Well, yeah, I talked about Eugene Debs last time I was on the radio when I was on that Sarasota program. A lot of people say that FDR was a great guy. He had some charisma, but FDR was not going to pass Social Security or any of those changes for the working class if it wasn't for radicals like Eugene Debs, that 1 million people at that time voted for. Even from his prison cell, he ran for president of the Social Party and got 1 million votes. Here's a man that's being persecuted for speaking out against war during World War I. He was, along with the unions, rebelling against the state, adding pressure to FDR, who finally gave in. So it wasn't FDR out of the goodness of his heart. And you can give the same analogy to Johnson. Anybody who's seen the movie Selma, it's actually pretty accurate. I heard Oprah made it. You see what happened when Selma, with King, arguing with Johnson, pleading with Johnson to pass the voting rights bill after he just passed the civil rights bill. So the voting rights bill was a struggle of people dying and King insisting and marching and getting arrested, and Malcolm X going down there as well. All these things had to come to pass before finally Johnson would give in. So it was never an easy thing. I mean, Frederick Douglass said there's no change without struggle. I believe he said that, or there's no progress without struggle. But either way, we're trying to, if you're trying to make changes in the political system of the United States, it's a very hard struggle. It's not an easy thing, even if the politician is well-intentioned. They have a lot of other pressures. I mean, Obama himself has not been pressured enough to make federal charges against all the different police departments that have killed countless black children and young black people. So, you know, I remember, I'm old enough to remember Herbert Walker Bush when he brought federal charges against the officers that did not kill but beat up and severely injured Rodney King. And the reason why Herb Walker gave in and brought federal charges after the cops were exonerated, but actually made them go to jail, was because of the LA riots. And you didn't see riots of that level in Ferguson or Baltimore. So unfortunately, it's a tactic that works. That's a form of pressure. I mean, when Dr. King died, there was riots throughout the country. And yeah, Dr. King was for nonviolence, but you can understand the anger of these people. And King, in the end, said, "How can I condemn the young people using violence in the ghettos of this nation, while my own government is the most violent nation in the world and is killing brown children in Vietnam?" And that's when King really started to have enemies and was fighting for the poor, against war, against imperialism. He was beyond civil rights. He went into human rights, became more radical, more like Malcolm, more militant, you could say. And that's really when they had King in the crosshairs and were going to take him out. And years later, the government even admitted this and paid compensation to the King family. But it's things you don't hear about. They make a statue to King, which I visited a couple times in D.C., but that's maintaining the mythology of King. To hear about the real King, who was more radical, he called for a radical revolution of values. You have to talk to people like Cornel West. You have to talk to people like Sherry Honkala and the Poor People's Economic Human Rights Campaign, because that was the last campaign of King, who was going to march on Washington for reparations days before he was killed.
Well, that's probably the reason why they took him out when they did. And the person that supposedly shot MLK was not, he denied it. He never confessed to it. Supposedly shot, and and later we find out that's a complete BS story. But they still say that's the true story in many places. They still teach that in the indoctrination system of the United States. In your school system, they still say that whenever I forget what's the guy's name. It's like Ray Earl James or something like that. Is
just like the guy who killed Kennedy, Well, I was going to tell you, Dexter King, who's Dr. King's younger son, met with this gentleman in prison and came out and said, "I don't believe this man killed my father." But when you have, the government charged with killing King and found guilty and paying money to the King family, or you have Dexter King coming out and saying, "I don't think this man killed my father," there's like no coverage in the so-called mainstream media. Why is this? Because they're part of the establishment. They're part of that corporate merger between government and between the government and corporations that we've talked about, and that's not what the real role of the media is supposed to be. Therefore, alternative media, using the technology that we have, is essential that we maintain that real journalism, that real activism. Orwell said, he said, what did he say? Something about public relations and about journalism. I've said the quote before.
He said that true journalism is exposing something rather than if you're not doing that, that's just PR.
No.
Public relations.
I remember the exact words now. He said everything else. He said real journalism is printing something someone else does not want printed. Everything else is public relations. And I think that's a brilliant and very accurate quote from Orwell.
Well, yeah. And Orwell, even though he wasn't printing the news, really what he's known for is 1984. Really, that was one giant publication of, what was the future to come in places like, the United States. Practically, we're almost living in 1984, where, the truces became hate speech. They use many of the same tactics to discredit activists as were shown in the book 1984.
He was dying. He wrote these visions of this future world that he wanted to prevent by exposing it in his novel.
Well, it seems like almost like the people, the elite, have used as an information manual 1984 of how they're going to run the United States. And we're going more and more towards an Orwellian state every day, it seems like.
They use Machiavelli
like I said,
as well. They use the Prince. They use, Machiavelli's work, how to be Machiavellian, how to work behind the scenes. And the enemy should be known. The enemy should be exposed. Somebody asked me once, "Why'd you read up on Machiavelli? Don't you hate him?" Don't they hate what he represents? How the politicians use it today? And I'm like, know your enemy. You got to read up on all these things if you're going to be a revolutionary.
Well, yeah, Machiavelli, really states how these politicians work, how the elite works. They work from a Machiavellian stance, and they do whatever it takes to win. Is one of the main Machiavellian stances, or whatever it takes to get their agenda through. Like I believe, what I think really happened in 2000. I believe that in the 2000 general election, I believe that they were not 100% sure, or that they thought that Al Gore wouldn't completely do the agenda that they wanted to do, or that it might have been too much of work to get him to do so. So I think at the last minute they had Florida rigged the last part, and so they could have at the general election they could have their guy win, George Bush, that they knew would do their agenda, would do the Iraq-Afghanistan war, would allow the Twin Towers to fall under their command, and all the other agenda pieces that he did. Usually the way that they rig the elections in favor of them winning is that they have the primaries rig it, and then they just weed out whatever true candidates are in the primaries. But I think at this time they haven't even let anybody, true, even announce a run. Everybody, even Bernie Sanders and Rand Paul, are supposed to be against the system, are really for the system if you know what they're really about. But yes, you definitely have to know your enemy, and that's it's like with Machiavelli reading that about that, or reading reading other books that are not, sometimes they're not
in the time of Borgia, and you see the corruption of the church in Italy at that time. So fortunately today we see an anti-corruption pope, a progressive pope, Pope Francis, who's going to come to Philly in September. Considering my class schedule, I may not go. If I do, I'd go with part of a delegation to Philly again with Reverend Bruce Wright, because it'll be quite a visit. And here's a Pope right out of Liberation Theology from Latin America. I mentioned Liberation Theology in my article earlier. And, he's really countering a lot of that old Borgia-type, Machiavellian-type corruption that the Vatican had been part of the Vatican for a long time, and the Inquisition and the conquest of the Americas, etc.
I have to say, though, that, one of the most, Pope Francis has major flaws. Like, he did say, it's like, I don't know if I can really support a guy that says that you can't call yourself a Christian if you own or manufacture guns. He didn't just say manufacture guns.
Said that I disagree.
I kind of see where he's coming from there, but own guns?
Said that I disagree with is that he said that Mahmoud Abbas was a good leader. He's not the legitimate leader of the Palestinian people. He was elected out of office 2006. They had voted Hamas in then. And I'm not particularly a fan of Hamas, but if that's the will of the Palestinian people, Abbas doesn't want there to be another election in Palestine, because he knows he'll be voted out a second time. So, Abbas has been complicit with Israel in the genocide of the people of Gaza. So I think that the Pope was good intended, but was a little over enthusiastic about that. Also in the context of guns, his statement on that, which I also disagree with, it was probably right after the shooting in Charleston. So it was probably an emotional response to the gun issue. But again, those
right response
to see that this is not about guns. This is about racism. So we interpret it a different way. But you can't find one person that you agree with.
Well, it's not only that. It's like if really the right stance really was that is that we need more guns in. It's that we should, it's like if more people were armed, more good people armed. When you disarm people, shooters will still shoot people with illegal guns, but there'll be nobody to, defend themselves, and they'll just all get massacred. If everybody was, if there were more guns in good people's hands, they would stop the shooters like that. In fact, there was a similar thing that happened at a church somewhere, and some lady pulled out a gun and stopped the shooter before he could really do anything. So it's like that's where a different circumstance happened. So it was a complete wrong response by the Pope.
6 black churches since Charleston that were burned to the ground, including in Florida, in Jacksonville. So this kid wanted to spark a race war. Unfortunately, there's still people that think just like this kid. The KKK said that he made a step in the right direction by committing the massacre, and they showed out in Charleston in defense of the Confederate flag. Brandon, Florida, near Tampa, has the largest Confederate flag in the country, I believe, in the world. So there's people that have legitimate grievances when it comes to racism and what the Confederate flag represents. The designer of the Confederate flag said the flag was meant for racial superiority. So the flag really does not represent Southern culture. It represents, to me, pure racism. And
here's the only problem with that statement, though.
Yeah.
Is that the person that designed the flag? I looked it up and did a little bit of research on that. Is that the guy that wasn't the guy that designed that guy did not design the Confederate naval jack, for one. That's not the flag that ever flew at the Confederate Capitol. The one that we see, that's just the Confederate naval jack. That you see, the one.
But you have
he designed the original Confederate Stars and Bars flag, I believe, is the one he designed, but he did not design the Confederate flag, that we know as the Confederate flag or Confederate naval jack. So that's kind of using that guy to say that the Confederate naval jack was designed on racist beliefs is not exactly a good argument, because he didn't.
In the Civil War, where they seceded from the Union, and following the secession from the Union, in the state houses of Virginia and South Carolina, etc., you did not have a waving of this Confederate flag. That idea of putting them in state houses came from the KKK in the 20th century. Okay, and the KKK exclusively comprised of members that are racist. They're more concerned about their superiority of whites than Southern culture. Southern culture is a facade to justify the symbol of racism. And that's how it's perceived by countless colored people and poor people throughout the nation. So in the midst of this semi-race war going on, we have to insist that the white working class and the white poor have more in common with the black working class and the black poor than the rich of any race have. And Lenin said something similar to that when talking about Jews in Russia, because this was right after the pogroms, the campaigns against the Jews by the Tsar. He said that, among the working class Jews, they're good people, just like any other Russian. But the rich Jews are like any other rich people, looking out for their own interests. They're the common enemy. And I've said that in Baltimore. I'm sorry, we went by Baltimore as well, but I said that in Philly to the comrades there that are part of the Black Lives Matter movement. Some of them were separatists or capitalists, but I think that the overwhelming majority of the blacks that were part of that were socialists or leaning towards that. And I hope that they could open their eyes and see that they don't need to form a separate society. They can have self-determination, but they can integrate that society with fellow working class whites as well.
But I wanted to state that it was. But I'm just saying that. But it was only the first national flag of the Confederacy was the one that's where the guy was talking about the white superiority. I'm just saying because it's not a good argument to use that when you're talking about the Confederate naval jack. Honestly, by the poll, by United States people, a lot of them were polled, and 57% said it did not represent anything racist, and it was just just a sign of the South, considering that it was not
denying the perception of the color. That itself is racist. Even the President Obama, though, I mean, when is he going to call the KKK a domestic terrorist organization? How many more acts like these have to happen with people that, I don't know if he was a member of the KKK, certainly supported the KKK, have to happen before the government says, this is a domestic terrorist organization. They have a history of terrorism. They're trying to fulfill terrorism again. So it's not just a foreign threat. They called occupiers, peaceful Occupy protesters, domestic terrorists, when the real ones are in hate groups like the KKK. It's not a free speech issue. This is a purely hate group. I'm not saying every person that has a Confederate Cloud House is a member of the KKK, all right? I'm just saying that the origin of this, implemented in the early 20th century, were by exclusively members of the KKK that were making a reemergence of the Confederacy and using Southern culture or Southern society to justify the continuation of racist segregation in the South, etc.
And the thing, I think that though there needs, what needs to be made? There needs to be made a unified U.S. leftist flag that people because it's to replace the U.S. flag. That's also, in my opinion, a racist flag, as it's been the flag that it was the flag that actually the slaves, the slaves when they were being transported to the United States, they didn't have a big Confederate flag on the ships. Anyways, there wasn't any slave trade during the Confederacy times. That was outlawed in 1808. All those slaves at that time had been bred from slaves that were brought in the past, but it was the United States flag that was over the slave ship, just to point that out. But it's also the United States flag is the one where 20 to 30 million people have been killed in war since the World War II.
There was
the same flag that there's been, this institutional racism, or today by the modern day police departments killing off unarmed black teenagers, or just unarmed black or people in general, or unarmed people altogether in the United States. It's been a state versus the people issue.
Chris,
but I'm just saying we need to have our own flag, the revolutionary flag.
Chris, we got a caller. Before I get to the caller, I just want to put out that what was I going to say? That in spite of it maybe being technically illegal, and I have to look up the years that these laws were passed, there were several Southerners getting away with kidnapping even freed black slaves in the North and bringing them to the South. And there was a movie based on the book of the man that went through that came out not too long ago. Okay, we have a caller. Go ahead and ask your question, sir, or ma'am.
Oh, I'm Gabe Rivera with Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, Gabe Rivera with EndTheDrugWarToday.com. You guys are talking about flags and banners, but you're flying the Otpor fist, which would identify you with hate groups that killed peaceful activists in the Ukraine.
We're identifying with what?
The Otpor fist. If you Google Otpor and Soros, you'll see the Otpor fist, which is the flag that you fly as your banner for your show. And the Otpor people have also shot peaceful protesters in the Ukraine. So it identifies you as a hate group.
Well, 90% of the show so far has been about exposing Nazis, especially in Kiev. Like, we're very supportive of the Novorussa, of the people in eastern Ukraine. So I don't know what banner you're talking about.
And also, there's another thing, is that we made up this banner. They're using our banner. We made it ourselves. So I don't get where you're coming from.
If you'll Google Otpor fist and Soros, you'll see that the fist that you have on your banner with the star is a Soros-generated meme, which would put you in association with groups that are probably...
talking about the fist.
Yeah.
Okay, well, the fist also is representative of, anti-fascism and Bolshevism long before Soros, had corrupted it. So we're talking about
and it was a black
for before
fist also. That's actually where I was thinking of when I put up the flag, or the fist on there on the logo originally. It was because of the Black Panthers,
which were also corrupted by the same elements. Like, when I see an Otpor fist, I think of people being shot in Ukraine by Soros.
Well, that's because they've been able to convince you that fist means that. The fist means something different to people that look at the history before Soros and see all the different anti-fascist and leftist groups throughout history that have their fist in the air. Unfortunately, Soros has taken that and corrupted that, but we don't want to let him do that, And our show's not just about, symbols, and we are talking a little bit about symbols in the Confederacy. It's been like maybe 1% of the show. But we're all talking about anti-fascism and leftist movements that we're a part of. That's what we represent. We don't represent the right in any way. We try to condemn the...
We don't support fascists like Soros. We don't support fascists like Kissinger. We don't support the Democrats. We don't support the Republicans. We don't support any of the corporate fascist system. And we definitely don't support the West Ukrainian Nazis that they support. We support Novorossiya. We support East Ukraine. And, for you to come on here and tell us that, it's like, okay, for one thing, to say that because that fist was used by that group, they stole that fist, okay? Let's say that if somebody, I don't know, what would be considered right now a pure symbol. I don't know. If somebody started using
stolen from the Indians from India by the Germans, right?
Exactly right. But is there a way? How am I going to denote when I look at your Otpor fist? And if I Google Otpor and Soros, can you put a little disclaimer that even though we're using a symbol that 90% of the time is a Soros-corrupted institution, we're not, or help others identify that symbology is attached to murdering people in the Ukraine, east or west? One is CIA-backed, one is, for example, when Immortal Technique is on RT, that's Russia Today, and he's a part of helping kill peaceful activists.
Wait, I just met Immortal Technique in Philly. What are you talking about?
Immortal Technique, heavy cocaine user. Heavy cocaine user is on Russia Today often. Russia Today is Putin TV. They kill peaceful activists in Ukraine.
I thought you were coming from a perspective that was... No, let me ask him. Are you coming from a perspective that's pro-Eastern Ukraine? I don't understand.
I'm not against violence in general, but I know that Eastern Ukraine is CIA-backed and Western Ukraine is Russian-backed, and that whole fuckover is horrible.
By the way.
I think you got it reversed, brother. You got to look at the map.
Well, could you put a disclaimer to say we're not with Soros and explain the whole Opport fist thing?
No, we're happy to clarify it with you, but I don't see why we need to do that. Chris, do you think we need to do that?
No, because most people would. Because when I thought when most people saw that fist, they were saying Black Panther, if anything. In fact, that's where that fist is originally really from, and also, of course, from way back in the Bolshevik days. But also, another thing I wanted to point out is that East Ukraine are Russian supported. But East Ukrainians are not killing innocent people, for one. They're trying to free themselves from the fascists in Kiev. And, these people that are fighting for their freedom, and fighting against fascism, it's a disgrace to say that they're killing protesters as well, when it's the West Ukrainians that have been killing protesters, killing people just because they're Russian or speak Russian. And be killing people basically on their blood, just like the Nazis' predecessors did in the past. So, I don't. If you're believing corporate media, corporate American media, I should state, only America though could have. I mean,
Russia's
corporate dominated news.
Okay, we're going to admit that, but they're a lot more truthful about what's going on in Eastern Ukraine than what you see on the CNN.
What about Immortal Technique on Russia Today? Are you going to tell me the Russians who killed protesters over the Sochi Olympics so they could dump toxic waste and create a debacle? You're going to tell me that's cool? Immortal Technique's cool being on Russia Today?
Well, that's an alternative media source, and they may be biased about Ukraine, but they're truthful about a lot of issues. They're certainly not going to on
killing protesters over Sochi. What are you talking about?
Talked about you.
What were you talking?
Program.
What do you mean by it? You mean that propaganda sent out by the U.S. that they were killing protesters over Sochi because what?
Immortal Technique is a protester. I don't know why he'd support killing protesters in other parts of the world. That really doesn't make any sense. Just because he wanted a network that represents millions of people.
Well,
and there was no killing of protesters in Sochi. That was that is United States corporate media propaganda right there. It's like, who kills protesters in Russia? Not the Russian government, but these people like the Westboro Baptist Church, yes, do target gays in Russia. And yes, and the reason why the gay propaganda law was put out is so gays don't go out in the parade, and then the police have to break up the fights that they get in with the dicks from the Orthodox Church, these Westboro Baptist, they're not just from the Orthodox Church, they're from the right section of the Orthodox Church. So I'll just clarify that for you.
They want to prevent a conflict between the two. I don't know all the internal politics, but from what I've gathered, that's what we got. And we're in the last few minutes of the show, but thanks for calling in.
I don't know. The caller's still there apparently, but anyways, we're actually almost out of time. It's 10:56. And I'm just gonna end the show off with. I'm just gonna say that if you do, actually, if the guy was re-added the call, I don't know. That's what it says, but or no, he left the call. Okay, now I can officially say this because I don't want to actually get in an argument in the last 2 minutes. Don't come on our show if you don't know your shit, please.
I don't mind being debated, but he actually got West Ukraine mixed up with East Ukraine. I'm like, what?
If you don't know your shit, we don't have time to educate. We can educate you on small facts, but we can't educate you on the whole situation. He had the whole situation wrong. He was buying into U.S. corporate propaganda.
He actually mentioned Immortal Technique. I just met the guy. I couldn't believe that.
And he was saying that Immortal Technique was complicit in killing protesters. That's some bizarre shit right there. I mean, it's like we should have Immortal Technique because he seems to have a lot of people that have a beef with him in the activist community of Payday Monsanto. I wouldn't consider this guy an activist. He sounds like some annoying. I don't even know what it sounds like. He sounds like some annoying South Park character. I'm sorry to say, and I don't care if you're listening to me right now. But it almost sounds like that guy, the guidance counselor from the South Park
comes on the program is that we support the Western Ukrainians, and then he says the Russians support the Western Ukrainians. Like, can he even be a little bit coherent? Like,
it sounds like little bit crazy version of the guy from South Park. These guys are killing Ukrainian protesters, okay, and you should stop putting that flag up there, okay.
I'm not going to clarify that the fist means something else because I expect people to know history. But we're on the last minute of the show, Chris. You want to give some final thoughts?
Well, final thoughts is that Snowden was a real patriot, and if you haven't looked into all his leaks, definitely look into all the. We haven't even get to mention the ones. Also, look into the stuff he said about ISIS. I mean, apparently he denied it later that he sent it out, but even if you just go down that route and start looking about that, look up Shimon Elliott, look up that's a really good leak right there that was sent out. And look into Assange's situation. If you haven't read up on it recently, it's kind of messed up that he's still stuck in that embassy. And if you look into other whistleblowers like Glenn Greenwald, he was a patriot. And thanks everybody for listening to UCY Radio, Voice of Rebellion Radio. This is Chris J, and we got Al Schwartz still with us in the studio. Al Schwartz, say bye to the audience.
Bye.
Cyanim, how have you been? I think we're gonna need your help again. Remember the passports from Britain, my friend? We need 20 more from Saudi and Yemen. What is coming is big and it is gonna sell. Much bigger than the King David Hotel. America's military should never say that. We are the bomb when we dress like the Arabs. U.S. will fight our war physically. It is ironic.